The billionaire lost everything, then came the night of truth. Before we begin, I kindly request that you please subscribe to my channel. Please share in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us return to the main character. The illusion of perfection. Victor Ashford stood in his penthouse office on the 49th floor of Ashford Tower, the crown jewel of his real estate empire. The morning sun cast golden rays across the glass and steel expanse, illuminating a workspace that had been meticulously designed to project power, success, and untouchable authority. At 54 years old, Victor had become a legend in the business world, a self-made billionaire whose rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth had been documented in countless magazines and documentaries. His company, Ashford Industries and Development Corporation, had revolutionized the global technology and real estate markets. He owned buildings in 17 countries, controlled a portfolio worth over $23 billion, and wielded influence that reached into government chambers and boardrooms across the world. Politicians sought his counsel. Celebrities wanted his friendship. Young entrepreneurs studied his business strategies in MBA programs. On paper, Victor Ashford had won at life in every conceivable way. But this morning, as he stood staring at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, something felt profoundly wrong. The cracks began to show. The problems had started subtly, so gradually that Victor barely noticed them creeping into his carefully controlled existence. His third wife, Margot, had left 9 months ago, taking with her a substantial portion of his fortune and leaving behind a 5-page letter detailing his emotional absence, his obsessive focus on accumulating wealth, and his complete inability to be present in their relationship. The letter had stung. But what stung more was that he couldn't genuinely argue with any of her points. He had, in fact, missed their entire anniversary trip to review acquisition documents. He had taken a business call during their son's birth. He had forgotten her birthday 3 years running, though he had remembered to sign the checks for her gifts. His relationship with his 2 adult children from his first marriage had deteriorated to the point of non-existence. His son Richard refused to take his calls. His daughter Vivian responded to emails with corporate formality, addressing him as if he were a stranger rather than her father. When Victor had attempted to insert himself back into their lives by offering them positions in his company, both had declined with barely concealed disdain. Vivian had written in an email that she didn't want his money or his help, she wanted her father back. But as she had pointed out in a painfully honest statement, she wasn't even sure that man existed anymore. The unraveling truth. The real crisis arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when Marshall Chen, his most trusted executive and the closest thing Victor had to a friend, walked into his office with a grave expression. Marshall was a tall man in his 50s, someone who had climbed the corporate ladder alongside Victor for nearly 30 years. They had built Ashford Industries together, had celebrated victories and weathered storms as a team. What Marshall revealed that day shattered everything Victor thought he understood about his own empire. "We have a serious problem," Marshall began, settling into one of the leather chairs facing Victor's desk. "I've discovered accounting irregularities going back 7 years. At first, I thought it was clerical error, but when I started digging deeper, I found evidence of intentional manipulation. Someone has been moving funds between subsidiary accounts, concealing losses, and inflating revenue reports." Victor felt his stomach drop. "Who?" he demanded, though he dreaded the answer. "That's the problem," Marshall said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. "The authorization codes and signatures trace directly to your office. To you. The paper trail suggests that you've been orchestrating this entire scheme." The accusation hung in the air like a blade suspended above Victor's head. He wanted to deny it immediately, but even as he formed the words, something made him pause. Had he signed off on these transactions? In the blur of paperwork that crossed his desk daily, the endless meetings and decisions, had he approved something he shouldn't have? More troublingly, had parts of him deliberately created plausible deniability? The confrontation with self. "There's more," Marshall continued, and Victor heard the tremor in his old friend's voice. "I've reported this to the board of directors. They've already contacted federal authorities. An investigation has been initiated. Victor, the SEC is getting involved. If they conclude that you were deliberately involved in financial manipulation, you could be facing charges for fraud, embezzlement, and a whole series of federal crimes. Victor stood abruptly, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. He walked to the windows, staring out at the city that had seemed to exist entirely for his conquest. The buildings were beautiful from this height, each one a monument to his ambition and drive. "What about the company?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Being dismantled as we speak," Marshall replied. "The board is bringing in outside auditors. They've frozen your personal accounts, pending the investigation. Within 48 hours, you'll have no authority here." Victor, none. "You'll be suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation." The conversation lasted another hour, but Victor barely heard the details. He was too consumed with a realization that felt more devastating than any legal consequence. He had built an entire life on a foundation of illusions. The success, the power, the respect that he thought he had earned through years of dedication and sacrifice were all built on the very deception Marshall was describing. The moment of reckoning that evening, Victor returned to his penthouse apartment, a 10,000 square foot sanctuary on the 52nd floor, with views of the entire city. The apartment had been designed by one of the world's most famous architects, featured in luxury magazines, and had served as the backdrop for numerous photographs of Victor looking powerful and content. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. He walked through rooms that cost millions to furnish, past artwork that should have brought him joy, but instead felt like props in a movie he no longer wanted to star in. He tried calling his children, but both went to voicemail. He attempted to reach Margot, but her new husband's assistant informed him that she was unavailable and had instructed all her staff to screen his calls. He sat in the darkness of his penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't, and he wept. Not tears of fear about the legal consequences, though those loomed large, but tears of profound regret, of loss, of the sudden crystalline understanding that he had exchanged his entire life, his relationships, his capacity for genuine joy, for an empire built on sand. In the stillness of that night, Victor Ashford faced the truth that his billions couldn't purchase happiness, his power couldn't command love, and his success meant absolutely nothing without someone to share it with, who actually cared about him as a human being rather than his net worth. He had lost everything, and suddenly he understood that he had never actually possessed anything that truly mattered. The descent into darkness the following weeks were among the darkest of Victor's life. His legal team worked frantically to prepare a defense, though the evidence of financial manipulation seemed increasingly damning. Prosecutors prepared charges. The media, sensing blood in the water, began investigative reporting that uncovered not just the accounting irregularities, but a decades-long pattern of ethically questionable business practices. News anchors discussed his downfall with barely concealed satisfaction. Business magazines that had once lauded him as a visionary now ran exposes titled "The Corruption of Ambition," and how Victor Ashford built an empire on lies. Former colleagues, eager to distance themselves, provided interviews describing him as cold, ruthless, and willing to trample anyone who stood in his way. The irony wasn't lost on Victor. Everyone was describing the man he had spent 3 decades becoming. They were right. He had spent his entire adult life cultivating precisely these qualities because he believed they were necessary for success. Now, facing the consequences, he understood the horrifying cost of his choices. The unexpected intervention. It was during this period of descent that Victor received an unusual visit from someone in his legal team. Miranda Vasquez was a criminal defense attorney with a stellar reputation and a quiet intensity that conveyed absolute confidence in her ability to navigate any legal situation. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to see directly into a person's soul. "Your case is complicated," she said, during their first meeting in his apartment. They sat across from each other in the living room, and Miranda had immediately instructed him to put away the expensive brandy he'd offered. Not because the evidence is unclear, but because of something more fundamental. You're not actually fighting the prosecution, Mr. Ashford. You're fighting yourself. What do you mean? Victor asked, genuinely confused. You're guilty, she said bluntly. Not in the legal sense that will be proven in court, though frankly. The evidence suggests you may be, but morally, spiritually, you're carrying guilt that goes far deeper than accounting irregularities. You're a man who has spent 54 years running away from his own humanity, and now that he's caught, he is prepared to accept punishment as a way of finally stopping. Victor felt something crack inside his chest. I don't understand what that has to do with my legal defense. Everything, Miranda replied. She leaned forward slightly. Your best chance at a favorable outcome isn't in courtroom arguments or legal technicalities. It's in genuine transformation. The judge needs to see that you're not just defending yourself against charges, but that you're actively working toward becoming a better person. That takes work, Mr. Ashford. Real, difficult, uncomfortable work. The unlikely partnership. Miranda referred Victor to Dr. Evelyn Hart, a psychologist who specialized in working with high-achieving individuals who had lost their moral compass. Evelyn was a woman of about 55, with warm brown eyes and an office that felt more like a comfortable home than a clinical setting. Unlike Victor's expectations of judgment, Evelyn approached him with compassionate curiosity. Over several weeks of intensive therapy sessions, Victor began to excavate the wounds buried beneath his obsession with success. He talked about his childhood in a rough neighborhood in Detroit, about watching his father work 3 jobs and still struggle to feed the family. He described the shame he had felt as a child, wearing hand-me-down clothes while other kids had new shoes. He explained how he had internalized the belief that success and wealth were the only answers, that if he could just accumulate enough money and power, he could finally feel safe. Instead, Evelyn pointed out gently, you've built a prison. Your wealth has become your isolation. Your power has become your loneliness. You've spent so long protecting yourself that you've become unreachable. The catalyst for change was during this period of psychological excavation that Victor encountered Cassandra Vale. She arrived through a referral from his legal team. The federal prosecutor had agreed that if Victor demonstrated genuine commitment to personal transformation, it would be considered favorably during sentencing. One of the ways to demonstrate this commitment was through community service and involvement in restorative justice initiatives. Cassandra ran a non-profit organization called Architects of Change, which focused on using design and creative projects to rehabilitate individuals involved in the criminal justice system. The organization's mission was to prove that people could transform themselves through engaging in meaningful work that contributed to their communities. When Cassandra first visited Victor's penthouse to discuss potential involvement in one of her projects, he was immediately struck by her authenticity. She was a tall woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair worn in a long braid, and she dressed in clothes that suggested she cared far more about comfort and functionality than fashion. She moved through his apartment as if the expensive furnishings held no particular significance. This space tells me everything I need to know, she said, standing in his living room with her hands on her hips. You have the resources of a king and the emotional interior design of a monk's cell. Everything here is expensive, and nothing here is you. Somewhere beneath the money and power, there's an actual human being. Mr. Ashford, the question is whether you're willing to find him. The journey begins. Cassandra proposed that Victor volunteer with her organization for the next 6 months, working on the design and renovation of a community center in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. The project would serve as both genuine community service and as Victor's personal excavation toward authenticity. It was the last thing Victor wanted to do. The idea of working with his hands, of being present in a poor neighborhood, of facing the very circumstances he had spent his life escaping, filled him with anxiety and resistance. But Miranda, his lawyer, was firm. This is your path toward redemption, Victor. Take it or face a much harsher sentencing recommendation. So, on a cold morning in November Victor arrived at the community center construction site wearing work clothes and steel-toed boots, neither of which he had worn in decades. The site was chaotic and real and utterly foreign to his experience. Cassandra put him to work immediately, assigning him tasks that required focus, precision, and genuine collaboration with other volunteers. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to happen. Working with his hands on a project that would genuinely benefit people who had nothing, Victor felt something awakening inside him. For the first time since childhood, he experienced the satisfaction of work done not for profit or prestige, but simply because it mattered. He began conversations with other volunteers, individuals from various backgrounds and circumstances. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was simply Victor, the awkward billionaire learning how to use power tools and take direction from Cassandra. And through these interactions, he began to understand what he had lost in his singular pursuit of success. The unexpected connection. As the community center project progressed, Victor found himself looking forward to the work in a way he had never anticipated. Cassandra was a demanding project manager, pushing him beyond his comfort zone and refusing to allow him to retreat into his characteristic patterns of commanding others or creating distance. One afternoon, about 3 months into the project, they found themselves alone in the center's main hall, which was slowly being transformed from a dilapidated structure into a beautiful community space. Cassandra was inspecting the new windows they had just installed, running her hand along the glass, checking for imperfections. "You're different," she observed, not turning to look at him, "than you were when you arrived. There's less armor." "I'm not sure what you mean," Victor said, though he knew exactly what she meant. "You came here like you were doing penance," Cassandra explained, turning to face him. "Like you were serving a sentence, even though nobody was forcing you to be here, except yourself and your desire to look better for the court. But somewhere in the last months, it stopped being performative. You actually started caring. About this place, about the people, about the work itself." Victor struggled to articulate the transformation that had occurred. "I spent so long believing that success was about winning, about having more than everyone else, about being the best. Working here, creating something that genuinely serves people who don't have anything to offer me in return except gratitude and respect. It's shown me that there's another way to live." The truth beneath the surface. Cassandra sat down on a concrete step, and after a moment's hesitation, Victor joined her. They sat in silence for several minutes, the late afternoon light filtering through the windows they had just installed. "Can I ask you something personal?" Cassandra said finally. "Why did you agree to this project? Honestly, not the version you tell yourself or your lawyer." Victor took a long time considering the question. "Because I had nothing left to lose," he finally said. "My empire was crumbling. My children had rejected me. My marriages had failed. My reputation was destroyed. And somewhere in the wreckage of all that loss, I realized that the life I had spent everything to build wasn't actually a life at all. It was an accomplishment, maybe an achievement, but it wasn't a life. And now?" Cassandra asked gently. "Now I'm learning what a life actually is," Victor replied. "It's moments like this. It's knowing that this space we're building will serve people who genuinely need it. It's conversations with you and the other volunteers where we're all just human beings trying to create something meaningful together. It's the absence of transactions, the presence of genuine connection." The reckoning, a week before the community center was scheduled to officially open, Victor's sentencing date arrived. He appeared before the federal judge in an understated suit, accompanied by both Miranda and Cassandra, the latter sitting in the courtroom gallery as a character witness for his transformation. The prosecution presented their case, outlining the financial crimes in meticulous detail. Victor's role in the accounting fraud, the falsified documents, the intentional concealment of losses. The facts were damning and largely undeniable. But when it came time for character testimony, things took an unexpected turn. Cassandra stood before the judge and spoke about the man Victor had become, about the genuine transformation she had witnessed over the preceding months. She described his dedication to the community center project, his willingness to learn, his capacity for authentic connection with people from completely different circumstances. Other volunteers also testified, speaking about how Victor had been instrumental in the project's success, not through commanding authority, but through genuine teamwork and dedication. The judge, a severe woman with a reputation for harsh sentencing, seemed genuinely moved by the testimony. When she rendered her decision, she acknowledged the seriousness of the financial crimes, while recognizing Victor's demonstrated commitment to genuine transformation. He would serve 18 months in a minimum security federal facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Additionally, he would be required to make substantial restitution and continue his community service work for the foreseeable future. It was not lenient, but it was far more merciful than Victor had expected. As he heard the sentence, he felt neither relief nor despair. He felt something closer to clarity about the path ahead. The transformation complete the night before Victor was scheduled to report to federal prison. He and Cassandra stood in the completed community center. The space was beautiful, filled with light and possibility. It would serve hundreds of children and families in a neighborhood that desperately needed resources. They walked through the space slowly, and Victor marveled at what they had created together. Not created in the sense of ownership or control, but created through collaboration and genuine commitment to something larger than himself. "I don't know how to thank you," Victor said. "You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing." "I haven't given you anything," Cassandra replied. "Everything I've done is simply reflect back to you the person you've always had the capacity to be. I'm not your savior, Victor. You've saved yourself." They stood in silence for a long time, and then Victor asked the question that had been haunting him. "When I get out, will you still be here? Will we still have a relationship?" Cassandra took his hand, and her touch was both gentle and resolute. "I'll be here. But I need you to understand something, Victor. The relationship I have with you can't be founded on gratitude or obligation. It can only exist if we're both committed to growth, to authenticity, to choosing each other freely. I'm not interested in being the woman who saved the billionaire. I'm interested in being a partner to a man who has genuinely transformed himself." As Victor faced the reality of the time ahead, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel again: hope. Not hope that he could return to his former life or rebuild his empire, but hope that he could build something entirely different. Something real, something genuine, something worth having. He had lost everything, and in losing everything, he had finally found something that actually mattered. The morning he reported to federal prison, Cassandra drove him to the gates. They didn't say much. There was nothing that needed to be said. Victor had spent 54 years accumulating, controlling, and dominating. Now he was learning the more difficult work of surrender, vulnerability, and genuine transformation as he walked through the prison gates. Leaving behind the man he had spent a lifetime becoming, he understood that this was not an ending. It was a beginning, and for the first time in his life, that actually felt like the truth.